All right. Well, welcome to our class tonight. A few lovely, beautiful, familiar faces are joining us. If you are new here, welcome. We are going to be painting a winter goose tonight using watercolors. I'll go over the supply list briefly first, and then we can go ahead and jump right in as a group. I'm going to be painting with you every step of the way. For the supplies that I have tonight is I have a range of just really basic acrylic and like general brushes. These are nothing fancy. If you have whatever you have at home, you can try and use for tonight's class. If you have watercolor brushes, great, use watercolor brushes. I just grabbed just different sizes, kind of small, medium, and large for the different areas. I have a watercolor set with lots of different colors, which is always really fun and exciting to have. With watercolors, you need a tray or a palette to mix your colors on. This has 3 different wells. If you have just like a paper plate or 2, that would be fine. But something with little sections to eliminate overflow from one color to another is always very helpful with watercolor. I have a cup of water. In some watercolor classes, you may want to have 2 cups of water, 1 cup of water for rinsing your brushes, and 1 cup of clean water for bringing that water in for blending. It's up to you. I just use 1 cup, but I've had 2 cups in the past. So if you want to play with those techniques, you're welcome to do that and to play with that. I'm using watercolor paper tonight. This is probably a 9x12 pad. I leave the paper right on the pad typically, and then once it dries, I just tear it off and I can put it into a frame, etc. So we're painting a really beautiful winter goose inspiration. If you're in the live class tonight, I did drop it into the chat window. With watercolor, you typically start with your lighter colors and you work your way to the darker colors. So what we'll be doing is you also work your way in the foreground and you work your way to the background as well. So there's a lot of different layers and a lot of different things going on. So what we'll do first is we'll be doing the goose in the foreground first. We'll be doing some of the long grass in the foreground, and we'll be working our way to the background with the trees. If you want to put in mountains or rolling hills or layers of fields, anything you want to do with this background is totally up to you. I'll let your imagination unfold, but that's going to unfold as we get towards the second part of our class. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my inspiration. I usually pull up my inspiration half in one, on one side of my screen, and then I have the class tutorial running on the other. So it's always really helpful to have that visual handy so I can, make those choices as we go along. So we can go ahead and begin. So I'm going to find like a medium-sized brush, maybe this one right here. This is a round tip, like 5. And I'm going to use this to do some of the outlining for the goose. And I'm going for a really light tan color for the goose. And a tan color is really oranges. And I'm just going to bring some water here. It's oranges and yellows. And I'm just going to bring some water on my palette and start to bring in some oranges and yellows to find the right color of the goose. This is a light color of the goose. So this is the lightest color, and the more water you add, you can see it's pretty light here. I kind of have like an ochre yellow. I'm going to bring a little bit of that in. I also have like a white. I could bring in a little bit of a white pigment if I want to lighten it. So this is going to be one of the lighter colors. This is a little yellow, which is fine. You can kind of pick and choose how you want to get to this color. There's quite a bit of pigment in this, but if I keep adding a little bit of water, it will kind of dim down. And if you want to, we could do a little bit of sketching with a pencil. So if anybody's interested in that, we can do that as a group. I can grab a pencil to do a little bit of outlining for our goose. So as you're mixing that color, I'll show you what it's like to grab a pencil if you want to do a soft outline of the goose. Now the goose does have a Santa hat on. Santa hat is optional. I'm not painting the Santa hat tonight. But I'm going to grab a pencil if anybody wants to do that with me. And this will really help us get our body the right way. So the goose is, if I look at the top of the page, the goose's head is about a couple inches down from the top. This is where you can kind of just make a mark. So I made a small mark right here for the head. If you want to draw a line and just do a light, gentle sketch for the goose's head, coming down to the back of the neck, and then doing this kind of round, kind of foofy body. The body comes down quite a ways. And if you wanted to take a minute to sketch the goose, the head is pretty chunky. It might boost our confidence as we're painting the goose itself, with a little bit of watercolor. So I am going to just take a minute. The body is really long. So maybe take a minute and sketch your goose with a pencil. And I'm going to do the beak and everything. The beak is kind of rounded towards the tip. It can be pointed in the air if your goose wants to have a little bit of an attitude. It's so funny. It's a little bit more narrow, and then it gets a little bigger. And the beak connects right to the neck. So, and the head's pretty big, actually. So I'm going to just play with some of these shapes. This is going to boost my confidence in painting this goose. I have a little baby goose going on. My neck isn't so long, but that means my goose is just younger. So play with this by doing a little bit of light sketching. I just have like a young little goose because he's just a little smaller. So it's up to you and I'm just going to do some soft erasing. So we'll just take a couple minutes just to do a little bit of basic sketching. I'm just going to erase some of this. A little gentle sketching. The beak kind of comes down. All right. And I have a little goose. It's kind of cute. It's kind of nice. And if I want to add a little bit of legs down here, my goose is kind of big. So I'm just going to have his feet kind of coming off the bottom. And I'm going to, from a perspective, there's more space around the one in the inspiration. Mine's a little closer to me. So one of the things about perspective is the smaller the goose is on your painting, the farther away it is. So whatever you have is fine. This is going to come out great either way. I'm not worried that my goose came out a little bit bigger, but I'm just talking about some of the differences we may see in our drawings. So that is totally fine. I'm going to do some gentle erasing for any extra lines. And I'm going to do some gentle erasing on the exterior of these lines too. So like where the lines are. So I can just see them just enough because we're going to be painting our duck in first. I have a young duck. My young duck. I'm just doing gentle erasing on these lines so I can see it just enough. And he's kind of facing me a little bit, which is kind of fun. Maybe I'll move over the leg over a little bit so he's a little more closer to me with his leg. So you can play with the perspective, all those things. So again, just get the shape so you're happy with it, and then just do a gentle erase. Now, Janice, if you're doing acrylics tonight, you don't need to do, crazy erasing if you're going to be covering it up with acrylic paints anyways, with like whites and things. Don't worry about that. But with watercolors, you have to be a little bit more careful with your lines. But this is allowing us to get the composition right this is one of the main subjects, right? So the size and the shape, we just take our time. Now with watercolors, I'm just having fun. I am not like a certified watercolor person. We're just here having fun, trying new things. So take that with a grain of salt, but we're all just going to have fun together. But but I have a cute little young duck here. And there are some lighter areas on this duck that I want you to kind of keep as light as possible. Underneath the duck's, like on the duck's face is pretty white. So I'm just going to see, I'm going to go under the chin as a starting point, just to start adding a little bit of color. And I want to hold on to the white spots. So on the back of the neck, I'm just playing with the color that I created. On the lower belly, the front of the neck is pretty white. On the lower belly, on the back side of the tail is all a little darker. So I'm really just being playful with just seeing how my color is. I'm kind of like testing out the color I made. So under the neck, right? Like even if you're painting like a human-like painting is always a little darker. The back line of the neck. The top side of the body is darker or is lighter. So think about all the where we would add a shaded like color. So this is pretty light, so which is good for me. I wanted to test it, right? So I'm going to use this color as one of the main colors of the duck. The duck can be and remain white, but you can start to bring this up a little bit if you wish. If you want to make a little orange and kind of play with the feet, if that brings you joy, you do that. I'm going to add a little orange down here for the feet because, hey, why not? Just so everybody can see where my leggies are. And I'm just starting with my lighter colors, and I'm going to add the shaded areas after. So as an example, like the right side of maybe some of these legs would be a little darker. So you can play with that as we go, but we always start with the lighter colors and we kind of work our way to the darker colors. But you can play with some of that. But I'm playing with what color I want my duck to be. So I have this orangey gold, yellowy orange color. And I'm going to just bring that in here for the darker shaded areas of the duck. So I'm getting a little darker. I'm getting a little bit more bold. I'm filling in the duck. And I'm doing dark and light areas. Now you could do, as I said, you could do some of the lighter areas, but you can play with using the darker areas as well. It's just about using the water to soften it where you need to, which is really fun. So I kind of tested that lighter color. That was really fun for me. But with watercolor, you can kind of use water to soften up as you go. So what I did, if anybody wants to try this, is I used a little bit of that darker color down along the bottom, and I'm using water and blending that color up to lighten the top of the body. So you can see how that's working. So play with finding that the lighter and the darker colors of the duck's body and using a little water on your brush to blend that base color up and in. And this is again for watercolors. If anybody's using acrylics, Janice, you can work your way dark to light as you see fit with your shading techniques. But I'm keeping the top side of my duck, and we're doing a base color. We're going to add some texture to this duck after, but we're doing a base color. See the bottom this is more of a yellow duck. I could have it be more true white. I just, and if I wanted to have it be a little more tan, I could mix a little bit of brown with this to make it a little bit more tan color. So if I mix a little bit of brown in here, I can make this a little bit more brownish tan if I wanted to. So I'm just being really open-minded and playful with the colors I'm using. So I'm just having fun with that. I'm using lighter colors to fill in, kind of filling in the neck a little bit, but I'm using lighter colors to fill in. The head can stay pretty white if you wanted to, but if you wanted to add like a soft, neutral color to fill in the duck's head, that's fine too. But I'm using water to really move around these colors, which is really fun. I'm going to keep the duck pretty white. I'm just adding some of these shaded elements in, and you can see they're really starting to come through. So I have a little bit of this darker color, just a little bit on the underside of the neck, and we're going to add some feather-like textures too. And then on the back side of the neck here, I have a little bit of a darker color. And if I want to like outline the back of the head a little bit, I can do that. So you can play with some of those details, but you can see I'm keeping my duck pretty light in color. And then you just let it dry. And if you're using acrylic, again, I'm going to mix a little bit of a brown tan. See how that goes. If you're using acrylic, you can add your lighter and darker colors as you see fit. I'm bringing in a little bit of a light brown on the tail. It's wet, so you can see the reflection. It's all very light, though. I want to keep this as light as possible. And we'll be bringing in additional texture on top of the duck after. So I want you just to be happy with some of this base color for your duck, because we're going to bring it to life even more with a little bit of texture after. So you can see the duck itself is really starting to come to life. I have a white head. I have a little darkness under the chin. I have some shaded under the bottom. And I've done the legs. I did the legs a little bit orange. I'll bring this down a little bit so you can see it. I did orange, and then I did a little bit of a darker orange, or a little bit more paint pigment of orange on the right side of the leg. So to add shading, if you wanted to try this, it's very easy. You just add a little bit more orange to one side of the leg, and it adds a little bit of shading to the, for me, it's the back side of the leg. See that? So my duck has legs. That's a good thing. And then I can always add more shading, darker colors after. So we're typically starting with our lighter colors, working our way in the foreground, and we're going to work our way to the background. So wherever step you're on, that's fine. I'm going to do a orange beak. And again, you could start with a lighter orange color, and you can always make it darker. It's got kind of a little bit of a U. And there's not a ton of light spots. There's a little bit of a light spot on the tip of the nose, but I'm just going to kind of fill in with, just to be safe right now, a light orange for my winter goose's beak. And there's a little bit of a bridge here. There's a little bit of a U on the top of the nose. And you can see that's just slowly coming to life here. So just take your time. If you wanted to, do your base color for your beak. The underside of the beak can be a little darker. So if you wanted to add a little bit more shade, even bring in a little bit more red to the not a red, but a darker orange to the underside. You could do that. You can always use a paper towel to do dabbing. So just take your time. I have a little bit of pooling going on at the end of the nose. So I'm just using my finger to kind of dab. You can always use like a paper towel too, to kind of manage like where your paint pigments are pooling. So you can kind of manage that with your finger if you feel like you have one area or another that is pooling. But you can use just the tip of the brush just to round these areas out. Always take your time. And my winter goose is coming to life. So we're just doing a lot of the basic lighter colors of this goose right now. We'll do the eye and the mouth at the very end. You can consider, I did a lot of the basic colors here. I am going to let the goose dry entirely before we do a lot of the feather-like detail. So what I want you to play with is play with the light and the dark spots on the goose. So if you want to bring in any other darker spots or darker elements of the goose, bring in any other darker areas as you wish. But you have to, with watercolors, you have to hold your white space. So you kind of have to be really mindful to hold your white space. And I did that. I wanted my face to be brighter. See that? See how it's lighter? I wanted the front side of this neck, you can barely see it, to be lighter. I wanted the back side of the body to be lighter. So those were just things that I was just mindful of as I was painting. These things just come with practice and in time. So give yourself a break. If you wanted to make the body a little darker on the underside, you can add more shading. But I'm getting pretty close. I want to keep my goose pretty light in color. Has like a nice orangey kind of brownish tint to it. And I can always make modifications to the goose if I want to. I am going to come in here. I do have some pencil lines. I'm going to do some gentle erasing with the pencil lines because the outline of my goose is now completed. So I'm just going to erase those lines if possible. And for me, I'm going to let my goose dry. We'll do the detail on top of the goose after. I have a pencil line on the top side here. My eraser marks are like, there we go. Just using my finger to kind of catch some of that eraser dust. There we go. You could always wait until it was dry too, either way. So I have a basic. And watercolor will dry pretty quickly. I want you to think about if you want to make any other areas of the goose, bring in any other darker colors. So again, with objects, we're starting in the foreground, which is our goose, and we're going to start with lighter colors and work now to darker colors. So we started with the darker colors on the bottom a little bit. We blended in our softer colors. I want you to look at the beak, and I want you to look at the legs, and if you want to make those a little darker. I have a little bit of a reddish orange here. I'm going to bring in a little bit more shading on the underside of the beak. And I can use a little water. So I'm dipping my brush in a little bit of water and I can blend it upwards a little bit. And I can wipe my brush off on the side of the water cup, and you can do a little bit of management. A little bit of extra dark shading on the underside of the beak is really fun. See that? What a big difference. Just a little bit more of a dark color on the underside of that beak. And we'll do a black line and a black dot on the nose after, but we're going to wait for that to dry first. Okay. The other thing I noticed is if you wanted to add any, like a little bit of like darker markings, like on the top of the goose's head, just like a little bit, you can add a little bit of darker markings. It's totally up to you. I'm not going to add too much, but maybe on the back side of the head here. And if I don't like it, again, I'm trying to hold as much white space as possible, but I can use my finger to kind of smudge it. Lean back in your chair and say, there we go. So I just added a little shading to the back side of his head. I'm making a choice to not put a Santa hat on my goose. I'm going to keep it more just winter and not holiday, but it's up to you what you want to do. So what we're going to do next is, my goose is pretty big on my canvas, as you can see. Your goose may be smaller, but one of the things I love about this inspiration is the winter-like snow, which is the color white. And then there's this winter-like grass that's happening. So one of the things I want you to do is, if you wanted to make some of that sage kind of light green grass color, we're going to add that in next. We also can add in a little bit of like a bluish gray for some of the snow. So let's do some of like a bluish gray for the snow. I have a little bit of gray. And the white snow for me is going to be white, but this is like a shaded color. So I'm mixing, I have a little bit of gray on my watercolor palette. and I have a little bit of blue. I'm going to make a bluish gray color right here. And I'm just going to add a couple of really small shaded elements just down here by the goose, just kind of underneath it. You probably won't be able to see it, but I'm just going to add a little bit of kind of snow-like texture just to mix up the bottom so it's just not all white. For me, it's really faint. And I'm going up, maybe, you know, you're going to figure out where you want your gooses, where you want the background to be. I'm just adding a little bit of gray patches here and there. For me, it's really faint. You can barely see it. It's just like this color is meant to give some shading in the snow, just like a little bit of casting shadows. I'm not going to add too much of it. You can barely see it. And I'm doing it fairly low, but it's just there as like a fun little accent. And then from this color, I'm going to make it a little darker. So I'm making a color for this tall grass, and it can be a green. I'm going to do blue and green mixed together because I love this bluish green color. And I'm just going to start with this bluish green color and just see what happens. And I am going to imagine where my snow line might be. So if you wanted to use this to just do a little bit of like long grass kind of coming up here or there, I'm just going to be a little playful. Let me just turn off my light to see if this is any better. No, it's still pretty bright. Let me just turn this down a little bit. I'm going to bring it down just a little bit so you can see it. My color is so faint here. Maybe my pigment needs to be a little bit darker. So I'm mixing blue and green. If you wanted to bring in a little bit of gray pigment, this is going to be fairly light. And I'm just going to do a little bit of this grass coming up. The reason we're doing it here, because this is the foreground. We're going to paint our trees and everything behind this. There it is. So there's a little bit of this grass coming up. I'm going to tuck this in lots of places. So if you have foreground, anything that's taller is going to come right up in front. I'm having fun. I'm just doing a little bit of this grass coming up. It's up to you if you want it. Maybe they're like stick-like bushes. It's absolutely up to you. You can do as much or as little of this as you wish. I did a little over here on the tail. You can just do a couple of like sprigs if you wanted to do just a couple of sprigs. This is optional. If you don't want to do this, you don't have to. This is just a light detail. I may put a little, like some of like the little berries on the ends of these little branches and things. That could be cute. It's your choice. But I'm just doing a little. I can always add more. And if you wanted to make any of these a little darker, once you do a light base coat, you can decide if you want to add any to be a little darker or not. A few of these can be a little darker. I made some of these darker over here. I have a little bit of another green color. I'm just being really playful. So you always start light, and you can always make an object darker if you wish. Okay. Now there's also a tree and tree branches coming in from the left side. So if you wanted to do something different, and I'm just going to go for it and be courageous for everybody, I'm going to mix kind of a not a darker green color, but a green, I don't want to say like a forest green, but I have a little bit of black, maybe like a dark evergreen. And I'm going to put some branches coming into the painting. Now, this is going to be really weird because we haven't painted the background first. but we're going to paint the background around this, which is going to be kind of a fun, different technique. And I'm going to imagine there's a tree coming in, being courageous here. And there's just a couple branches. And it can come near the duck. That's okay. The duck doesn't mind because these branches are behind the duck. And I'm going to leave some gaps so I can paint the background behind this. This is just really big branches, so I can paint some of that blue behind it. See, I'm kind of building in a tree. This is something I'm doing. If you don't want to do this, that's totally okay. But I am just being really footloose and fancy free tonight. And I'm going to put in blue around this. Now, we could have done a little bit of blue background first, but with watercolor, sometimes we have to kind of improvise and build that in, especially with layering. So I'm not going to do a ton more than that. That's just a fun little detail. I may, if I want to, I can do a little bit more. I could do a little bit of that over here. I'm not going to do a lot because I'm going to put a big evergreen in the background after, but I'm just going to tuck in a little bit of a tree here coming in. And you can do it as light or as dark as you want. And your paint will pool if you're doing watercolors. It will pool in certain ways. So just keep in mind how much pigment is pooling in certain areas. And I just have a little bit of nature coming in, which is fun. I'm not going to add too much more than that. And again, I'm keeping the ground all down here white. I have a little bit of this grayish blue situation happening, which I like with these little things coming up with my little grass. So take a couple minutes. Less is sometimes more, so you don't need to have a lot going on. I added a little bit more than expected, but I still like it. I still have a lot of blank areas because I can tuck in my trees behind some of these elements, right? Because we're working our way from the foreground to the background. So in the foreground, we have some of this grass at the bird's feet. We have some of these trees that are coming around us. But as we work our way to the background, we have those tall, dark green evergreens, and we have that lighter gray blue background, and that's what we'll be adding. All right, I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. How's this going for everybody? Are you having fun? I think it's so fun to work differently sometimes, isn't it? And we can, if you want to add any little red berries, again, because we're working our way from the foreground to the background, these berries may be on these trees, right? It's winter time. So if you wanted to mix like a red or a dark red, you could put a little bit of berries on anything that you wish, really. So maybe you could do little kind of clusters. Okay. We're going to paint the background around this, and it's going to be so fun. I am just, and these can be like more like buds than berries. I'm just doing little dots here and there. And for me, I'm going to put these just along the right side and along the left side. I don't want them to be too distracting for the painting. So I just did some over here. And again, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to. I'm just really being in the moment as an artist. And I'm just trusting the process. And I just got a little bit of green paint on a white area. So if you ever happen, so my finger dragged, you can always grab a little bit of a wet paper towel, squeeze it out, and I'm going to try to rub and clean this off. And it's coming right off. How amazing is that with watercolor paper? Woohoo! I got it in my sky. All right, so I'm just doing a few red berries. I'm going to do a little bit more on the other side, and then we'll just keep working our way to the background. I'm just doing a few dots here and there. So again, I want you to have your base colors for your burden. I want you to have a little bit of gray shading for your snow. I have a lot of white in the background. I have some of this tall grass. And I have a little bit of tree coming in. Now I can always make some of these trees a little darker if I want to, because those are in the foreground, right? I'm not putting anything over those. So I can always darken some of those side trees if I want to. So keep that in mind. But I'll give everybody as much time as you need to finish those steps. You can give me a 1 more minute, a 2 more minute signal, or a thumbs up based on where you're at. Terry, is that an okay or a 3 minute? She gave me an okay with 3 fingers. All right, cool. Okay, so can you guess which step we'll be doing next? The trees, those big pine trees. So I want these to be a darker element for your painting. This is a contrasting color. I'm going to go for like a forest, beautiful, like a dark forest emerald green. I'm pretty close with this pigment I have right here, but for me, I need to make it just like a little heavier in pigment. And if you want your color to have a little bit darker, add a little black, add a little blue. If you like a little bit of a blue tinge, totally up to you. But I want it to be a little darker for us. So I just added more pigment from my watercolor palette to this. And I'm just finding the right color on my palette first. So this is an interesting thing of painting snow on our trees and watercolor. So what I want you to do is I want you to think about, let's put our first tree in together. There's going to be 2 trees for me. I'm going to do a little bit of a dot. And I want you to imagine, I'm doing a little dot up here, and I'm going to paint the tree behind this branch. Now I'm doing a little bit of and I'm going to leave a little bit of spacing, like there's snow on the tops of these branches. So I want you to kind of create little gaps in between your branches. And I'm starting pointy on top, and I'm kind of doing little dabs, and I'll bring this down a little bit for everybody. You want to hold white space on top of the branches. So I'm just going to slowly build the branches with little gaps, and then I can use the green paint to fill in as I need to. You want to have gaps. I'm going to bring this down a little bit more if I can. You want to have gaps, white gaps in the middle of the tree too, like there's snow in the middle of the tree. Because you can always add more green paint, right? So I'm going to make this more thick as we go, but I'm creating branches. It's getting a little wider as I go out. I'm going to bring this a little closer to show you. So it's pooling up a little bit. That's okay. That's dark. Use your brush to create that texture and technique. By leaving little gaps, it's going to look like snow. So see, I'm coming out with the branch, but I'm leaving a little bit of a white gap on top. That's allowing it to kind of look like a little bit of snow-like texture. Okay. Now you're going to bring this down as far as you want. You can kind of connect some of these, but the consideration is leaving in some gaps for snow. You can always fill in white gaps with green. You can paint in between some of the green areas. Be playful here. Take a deep breath. You got this. Have fun with it. Your tree is going to get a little wider. This tree is going to go right behind my goose. So I'm going to come all the way down. I'm leaving lots of white gaps for snow. And then you can come back in with your green and kind of fill it in And I'm going to make some of these a little darker so you can bring in a little bit of extra paint. So it might be a little lighter in some areas right now. It might be a little darker areas because some of this has a little bit more pigment, some doesn't. And this is where you can be really playful on where you put your pigment because it will kind of flow and stay right within those little nooks and crannies of branches that you just created. So I'm doing a little bit of extra, adding a little bit of extra pigment with the tip of my brush, dipping the tip of the brush in the pigment and then going back to the canvas and applying it. And I'm going to go all the way behind this goose. And you can go as far over, even off the page as you wish. So it's absolutely up to you. But play with where you add pigment. I can kind of lean back in my chair and connect the branches maybe in a spot here or there. But you can be, and you can always add more after. You can around, placement. You can make the tree a little taller. But I'm going to rinse and repeat. Maybe I'll make a little bit more paint. And I'm going to do another tree over here. Maybe you want I didn't do any crazy sprigs. My tree is pretty, I'm going to do some wild and crazy sprigs on this tree because it looks too uniform. So I'm going to do some up and down kind of broken like branches just to make it look a little bit more fun. Maybe I'll make it a little taller. I don't know. So lean back in your chair, use your own perspective and consideration for some of this work. Okay. No, I lost some of my white. So I lost a little snow, but that's fine because I went a little crazy on some of the green, but that's no big deal. We're here to be playful anyways. So it's all good. All right. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to add a little bit of green in. So I'm going to add in whatever your process is for painting in these trees. Again, I'm leaving some gaps intentionally. I'm doing little kind of dabbing brush strokes. I'm going to paint it behind the sprig that I have, this tree coming out in front. I'm painting it as a layer in the background. Which sometimes it's fun. It's really fun to do things differently sometimes. In acrylic, we wouldn't typically work like this, but it's really fun to try some new things. Ooh, this tree is going to be like a little bit of blue. It's going to be a little darker. So let's see how this goes. I'm going right in between some of this grass. Now there's another little tree kind of tucked in here too. I'm going to add in just another little tiny tree. I'm going to try to hold space on top for the snow. If that doesn't happen for you, don't worry. Don't kill yourself here. We're just having fun. But you can see our scene is really starting to come together. If you kind of lean back in your chair, you can see where the pigments, the darks, and the lights are really starting to come out on the tree if you're using watercolors. It's really quite fun to bring in a little bit of extra pigment into those areas. And when it dries, it's going to look really neat too. You can always bring in a little bit of extra pigment in areas as you're bopping around to make out a little bit of like this, different kind of fun colors. In watercolor, you can drag your brush around and you can move that pigment while it's still wet too, which is really fun. So my tree line is right here kind of at the duck's back. I am going to keep my trees here, like the snow is kind of coming up to there. But you could bring your trees further down if you want. It's totally up to you. I'm going to bring this up a little higher so you can see the full perspective. Again, if you wanted to bring your trees down, maybe I'll come a little further down. That's fine. Let's see, maybe I'll bring this tree down just a little bit more. You can make some of those choices on how far your trees come down. But you don't want to go into your duck, obviously. You want your duck to remain duck colors. But kind of lean back and you can decide where you want this pine tree to come through. if you want to have it come off the page, etc. But I'm painting around all those other details that I did, which is really kind of fun and liberating. And we're going to paint the background in after. Now it's a little more difficult to paint snow on that background, on a colored background, especially with watercolor. So if you have white, we could do white on top of it after. But we'll do that background next. So I'm going to just play with mixing that background color. If you're not there yet, don't worry. But I'm getting pretty close to doing that full background color. I'm going to mix blues and blacks together to find that soft gray. And I'm just going to kind of fill in and around. And this, I'm just going to dance my way around objects. And this is going to take a few minutes, but I'm just going to dance my way. I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap in between things just because I can. If you don't want to leave a gap, that's fine. You can use as much or as little water as you wish. And I don't know, if this is the right color or not. If you want to do different colors, if you wanted to add mountains or any other objects, you can into your background. I'm just going to go straight for this background color. If you wanted to use a different size brush, you could use a different size brush. I'm just going to use this brush because I'm in more control, kind of dancing around some of these tree-like elements. So I'm just kind of dancing my way around some of these elements. I'm not painting over these branches. I'm going around some of these branches. You can play with how the pigment is being applied. I'm going to just dance my way around these trees ever so gently. I'm going to go gently around my goose's head. And if I want this background to be darker, it's so light, right? That's one of the things I'm noticing. I can always make it darker. You can't make a dark, it's more difficult to make a background darker or lighter rather than darker. So if I want to make this a darker gray, which I probably will, I can do that. But I'm at a point now where I was able to make that decision and choice as an artist that I want to go darker. And I'm just having fun kind of dancing my way in between these branches. But this is where you can be playful and you can experiment around how dark or how light objects are, how you move the paint pigment around if you're using watercolors. I'm just going to continue using this color because I may add just dark spots in some areas. So I'm just following my intuition here. I'm not doing one thing or another differently. I'm just going dancing around my tree ever so gently. You can leave a little bit of a white gap around objects, or you can paint right up next to an object. It's absolutely up to you. Pay attention to your brush strokes on how the paint pigment is drying. You can see your goose is going to start to jump out of the page a little bit because the goose is one of the lighter elements on the painting. So if I have a dark background here, which I'm going to work my way towards, I promise. I'm taking it one step at a time. The goose is really going to stand out. And for me, I really want that goose to stand out. And I'm going to be really careful to not paint on top of the goose. I'm talking about that for you to be mindful of yours as you're painting. And I'm not going all the way down with this background color. I'm going to use my finger and kind of smudge this around so it blends nice and evenly. I'm not going to go below with this background color. Right now I have it's like kind of a light sky color. I'm going to make this darker. But at least I have a nice starting point for the background. And these are the choices you can make. Some of you may have a darker color than me initially. No problem. Perfect. All right. I'm just going to finish this color out in between these branches. And then I can make choices of where I want to make it darker, because I know I want to bring a darker color in for the background. Just I'm not sure where I want to do that yet. And down here, the whole bottom half is going to remain white for snow. So I'm being really intentional about that. But I do know I want the background to be darker. So I need to get a little bit more brave here and mix a darker color. That's basically where we're at here. So I'm going to be brave and I'm going to mix a darker bluish greenish color. I have lots of colors. I'm just going to find color that I like. Take a minute to mix a color that I like. It's a grayish color for this background. I don't want it to be the same color as the trees. So the trees are one color. I need it to be the background needs to be a little lighter than the trees, so this or a different color than the trees, so the trees still stand out. So I need to be careful about how dark this color is. So I'm just going to slowly, I'm gonna do a little test spot over here. And this color works because it is a little more gray than green. And if you want to do a combination of dark and light colors, it's totally up to you. I'm just being really playful and open-minded to kind of what's happening. You can put a little extra water on your brush. Again, check and see what brushes you're using. Maybe you want to use a different brush. Maybe you're happy with the brush you're using. But I love that I can see some of these trees. Again, I can get as close or as far away from these trees as possible. I can always make the trees a little darker too. Remember we talked about that? I can always make these trees a little darker, which I might do. So it's just about the evolution of your painting. And if you've been a part of these classes before, you know that it's best when you paint to just be present to, what you're painting. And your painting is going to evolve. So it's really just about making decisions on the fly about what you want to do and where. So I'm just slowly bringing in a little bit. I'm intently doing a darker background in between some of these elements. I am going to make some of these tree branches on the sides coming in a little darker so they really stand out. So that's something intently I'm going to be doing as well, but I'll do that in some of our next steps. If this is challenging for you, you got it. You can do it. I did a little dark under the bird's chin. You can see the sky's getting a little darker. For me, that's what I wanted. I'm going to try to add snow on top of this after using white. I haven't really done a ton of that, but we're going to be playful with it. And I'm just adding in a little bit of darker sky here, dancing around my trees. I'm going to make some of those branches on the side darker so those stand out. So just take your time, follow your own intuition. Everybody's color palettes are a little different too, I'll mention. But for me, the winter duck is the focal point. So I want to make sure from a contrast perspective that the duck stands out. And by adding in this darker background, my duck will stand out. Okay. So you can see the duck's head is already standing out much more. Okay. I'm going to make a dark green for these tree limbs. I'm going to make them pretty dark that are coming in. I want them to really stand out against the background. So this is where you can always darken an element if you need to as you go. And this is a great example of that. I really want these to stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to add another coat of paint to them and make them stand out a little bit more. And you can see they started to jump out of the page a little bit more on the left side, where I'm giving them a darker second coat. I'm going around those red berries. Those red berries are standing out because I didn't paint over them. I've been painting around them because they are in the foreground in consideration to the elements in the background that we just painted. So lean back in your chair, follow your own gut with what you want to change or modify or enhance from a color perspective. You can change the color of anything, make anything a little darker if you wanted to. I'm going to make some of this foreground grass just a little darker in areas while I have this darker green here. That is speaking to me. If you happen to add too much watercolor pigment in one spot or another, just use your finger to swipe it off or use a corner of a paper towel. I need to make a choice if I'm going to make the background a little darker or not. I might make the background a little darker, ladies. So you can pick and choose what you want to do. I might make it darker. If you want to go and we can do a little bit of detail for our goose's eye and mouth and nose. So you want to find a small brush of choice, fairly small as possible if you have something small. And you're going to just do a black color or a dark orange. I'm just going to go for black in some of my orange color that I have here. So you're going to probably do a couple coats, but you can start with it can be lighter. And if you wanted to use your pencil for the placement of the eye first, you're welcome to do that. If that helps boost your confidence, do it. The eye can be up high or it can be, fairly low. I'm just going to kind of do a little bit of sketching on where I might want my eye. And I did a spot kind of right here by the tip of the nose. You can't really see it, so I'll paint my eye in so you can see it. It's just I'm doing a dark circle. And if you wanted to leave a little white dot for the people that are doing watercolors. Now my eye needs to be a little bigger. It's not big enough. And then I have a really kind of light, it's not a high pigment, but I'm gonna do a little bit of a nostril. Kind of looks like a grain of rice, sort of, on an angle on the nose. And then a line for the mouth. And then the line for the mouth is fairly low. It's on the low side of the beak. I'll actually probably start it here. It's not in the middle of the beak, it's on the low side of the beak. And you can always make a darker pigment after, once you get the basic shapes in first. And you want that line to be thin. You want to have the beak still be at the end. So I'm going to bring a little bit of orange with a clean brush, just right around to the lip of that mouth, just to make sure it's there. And I'm going to probably add a little bit of a darker orange again on the underside of this to show that this is the mouth area. And you can make that eye as dark as you want, just using a little bit more pigment. Trying to leave a little white speck in the eye. If you don't get the white speck in your eye, I'm not going to tell anybody. Go grab a little bit of acrylic paint, put a little white dot. I don't care. So there's my little goose or duck's face. It might actually looks like a Peking duck. I don't know if I ever told you all, but I had ducks at one point in my life before children. Imagine that. I rescued 12. They weren't Muscovies. What were they? They're kind of like the mallard like ducks. And I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I rescued 12 of them and I raised 12 ducks. And then we got 6 Peking ducks which are the white ones with like the beaks. And they were so much fun. Ducks have so much personalities. So I have a duck tonight and not a goose, which is fine. This is a non-judgment zone. So we have these animals that are just coming to life. So I did the eye, I did the nose, I did the mouth. I'm going to let that dry. I still feel like my background needs to be darker. So I need to get a little more courage here, ladies, and make my background darker. If you don't want your background to be darker, that's fine. But for me, I really want to go contrast with that background. So I'm just going to add more black, God help me, to my green here. And I'm just going to go for it a little bit here. And I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm just living my life here on the wild side. But I'm going to go for like this darker green. And maybe I just do it in some spots. I don't know. But I'm just going to make this a little darker. But I want you to look around any spots that you want to do, additional work on. Feel free. We're going to do the texture of the goose next as a group. But look around, see if there's any additional areas where you want to do any tweaks. I just personally want a little bit more darker contrast in the background for my duck to stand out a little bit more. And because we have a base color already, it makes it a little easier to bring in a little bit more of that darker color for me anyways. So it's up to you if you want to go darker or not. I'm going to go a little darker because I want the contrast. I want that duck to really stand out. I'm going to dance this darker color again around each of these branches because I want those branches to be seen. You can manage where the pigment pools, so you can move that pigment around as needed. You can bring this background color as close to the objects as you want, like as close to the duck as you want. I'm going nice right around the duck's head. This is where I want that contrast to really be shown. I want my duck to really stand out, and it's already making a big difference. Do a nice clean line on the back of the duck's head for it to really stand out amongst the background. And I kind of swish my brush around the background for it to all blend together. And again, you can use as much or as little water as you wish to move that paint pigment. That's one of the fun components of watercolor is you're not just using paint, you're using water to control the blending and the movement of that paint pigment, which is really fun. So I'm just going to dance in between this tree. I am holding some white space in the tree again because we are holding some of that for snow. So it's all up for interpretation of what we do and where, as you know, what you see as an artist with the work you're doing. So my bird is standing out a little bit more, which is what I wanted. Right. And I'm going to put a little bit of this kind of gray background color in between some of these branches over here, just to maintain some of that look. And again, I have a lot of snow down towards the bottom of the half of the bottom of the canvas is all snow. So I kept that there intently. And I can tuck in as much of this background color again around some of these berries, around these branches as I wish. It's kind of fun to play with where you hold the white space and where you don't with watercolor. But we did a really good job of holding space. If I want to come in and add any more darker greens to these trees, ooh, you could make some of these trees have a little bit more contrast. So I have a little bit of this darker green. I can make some of these trees be a little darker in areas. That's fun. But we'll do our goose and the goose texture as some of our final steps. So for me, I'm having fun adding a little bit more dark green texture to some of my pine trees. I'm holding some of that white space because for me, it looks like snow, but again, do as much or as little there as you wish for yourself. But a little bit of extra contrast for these trees just brings them to life a little bit more. And as things dry, they start to look a little different. What we'll do is I'll give everybody a few minutes to play with some of these steps. And in just 2 minutes, we'll start with some of the texture on the duck, which will be really fun as some of our final steps. But look around at the grasses. I want you to be happy with your grass colors. I want you to be happy with your shading. If you want to add any more of that gray like shading. I'm keeping a lot of the bottom white to have it be like a snowy like atmosphere. I'm adding in just a little bit more kind of grass like coming up, but I'm having it fairly white down here. If you want to touch up any of your berries to be a little bit more red, great time to do any touch up for your berries. I'm going to go and add a little bit more red to my berries. Just using the tip of my brush. It's a little secondary color. It's really fun to watch things dry, to see how they dry. So with watercolor, it's you get to make choices on how much pigment you bring in, right, for your darks and your lights. I'm just using the tip of the brush just to do little dots to accent those berries. For the goose, we'll add feather-like texture and we'll add bands of, I'm going to say bands of feathers, but using little dashes as texture on top of our goose or on top of your duck, however your bird has evolved here. We'll do that as our final step. And again, tonight's class, it could take an hour, it could take an hour and a half or 2 hours for your artwork. So always go at your own pace. Always do as much or as little as you wish. But I'm so excited for this final step because it is a soft detail that will really add some beautiful character and texture to your bird. And for me, I'm going to find just a small brush of choice and I'm going to mix an orange and a brown together. So it's kind of an orangey brown color. And it's going to be soft enough that it's going to match the bird, but it's going to be dark enough that it's going to stand out just a little bit. So I have kind of a brown color here. And I have a really tiny brush. The brush I'm using is a 2/0 fraction brush. And we'll start when you're ready. We'll start with the bird's chest. And there's a little bit, and we're going to do a little bit of a band, and we're just going to do little dashes. And it's going to be like a little bit of a chest band, like kind of like a little bit of a neck collar around its neck. And it's going to be, and you can just really play with how light or how soft this may be. You can do a single kind of band where there's shading. So I'm doing around the neck just to add a little bit, but I'm going to come up under the chin and I'm going to just do little dashes. It's going to be a little heavier or a little thicker under the chin to kind of show where the jaw is. So you could think of these as little whiskers, but this is a little bit of texture, soft textures.
Megan, what color did you say again?
This is brown and orange mixed together. I'll zoom this down a little bit. I'm just using little dabbing brush strokes. And where you want it to be a little heavier under the chin, just doing little bits of texture. But on the front of the neck, as you work your way down, you want to keep that nice and light. So you can kind of bring some of this texture to the back side of the neck. So you want to transition where you're adding these little feathers, these little bits of texture. And it's fairly light. So I was intently the front side of the neck down here, I left white. As we work our way down, I love these little bands. Like they're little locks of feathers. You can bring this kind of up a little bit. So I'm being very soft, little tiny brush strokes. You can do as much. So leave some white space, and you can play with the angle of these lines. So as they're on the front here, I'm kind of swiping them back, like the feathers are being tucked under the belly. And this is so faint, but you can see it. I'll bring this a little closer so you can see it. And you don't need a lot. You can kind of create little bands of feathers on the back side. These are kind of rounded bands along the back side. And there's actual feathers on like the back of the butt area. So down here, back here, you can do kind of rounded like feathers. The tail feather you can kind of outline on the back of the butt up high. So you can do long feathers, maybe on the back side of the butt, you can play with that. And then you can do these little textured feathers. They're kind of rounded bands on the back side of the body. Vertical bands, you can play with that. I'm being really playful, but it's really fun to play with the direction and the texture. I'm doing soft little brush strokes. If you want to do some long sweeps, like they're kind of layers back here. If you look at the inspiration, there's some long layers, but just some little, kind of 1, 2, 3 rounded layers, and they're all this kind of little, kind of like little rainbow arches, just kind of forming the back feathers of the bird. I'm going to just do some feathers, some long dashes on the underside of the body. So just use your eye, do as much or as little here as you wish. This is a brownish orange color. You don't need a lot of these, They can be complementary, you know, to the basic color of the bird. Just kind of lean back in your chair and make some of those choices of what feels right. Getting it under the chin, that was a great space to have a little bit of the shading. I could do a little bit here, kind of above the eye a little bit. I want to keep the head fairly light, but if you want to add a little bit on the head, you can. You can smudge with your finger, or Janice, you could just paint over it if you do too much up there, but I'm just kind of smudging on my finger. I want to keep my bird's head light. See how it's really shining below, like on his cheek right there? That's great shining kind of brightness for me. I really wanted to keep some of that lightness for the bird. But again, everybody's is going to look so different. And I just have just enough texture. I didn't want to go too crazy. I wanted to keep my bird light, and I wanted to be just soft little details and designs. And while that's drying, I'm going to see if I can get white to show up. I have a white watercolor. I'm going to see if I can do white snowdrops in the sky. I don't know if it's going to work or not. Haven't really done this technique before, to be honest, but we could try it. I'm just doing white watercolor with water. Let me see if I can do little white drops. Oh yeah, that works. You can do white little snowflakes in the sky with white watercolor if you have it. You could do round little circles, or you could just do little snowflake drops. Little circles is a more kind of controlled way to make it a snowy scene. I'm just doing little circles. You can do you can manage with the tip of your brush. It's going to be a little flurry storm here. I'm happy with the feathers, so I'm just adding in a little bit of white snow to my background. I'm happy with my background. I could make it darker, but I'm going to keep it the way it is. I'm adding just a little bit of snow here and there in between my trees if you wanted to. I'm not going to add any snow on my trees. You can use as much or as little white pigment as you wish to add snow. My background could be much darker, but I'll show you what my snow looks like. It's fairly mild. If I had a darker background, my snow would stand out more. I also have quite a bit of water with my white pigment. So if I had less water and more white pigment, my snow would be much brighter. So I do want my snow a little brighter so I can come in and add a little bit more pigment to my mixture. But this is where in the class you can really do anything that you wish for any final touches. If you want to spend another hour or two just being really playful with these details, some of you may be still working on your bird's feathers. Absolutely fine. If you're watching the recording, I encourage you on YouTube to like and subscribe this video if you haven't already, just to get alerts and updates, but also more importantly, if you have any questions about the process or today's class, don't hesitate to write. I will be happy to answer questions as they come up. But I hope you all loved this. This was really fun and different. I'm just adding a little more snow because it's a snowy scene. I want my snow to show up nice and bright. So I'm making sure it has good white pigment in that paint. And I'm doing kind of bigger dots and I'm doing smaller dots. And if you wanted to use that white pigment to really add in any snow, more so on top of your trees, you can. I left a lot of like white space. I may come in here and maybe I even do it right now. I could come in here and fill in some of these trees a little bit because some of these trees are pretty, there's a lot of space. So maybe I'll come in and fill in some of the white gaps for my trees. Just a little bit here to make my trees look a little more full. See what happens. Just to fill them in a little bit more. So everybody's going to be working on their own finishing steps, own finishing touches. Maybe it's just like the core of the tree. I'm just using some of my leftover green colors just to fill in some of the core areas, aka the center of the tree. And that helps a little bit to make my trees a little bit more structured. And they're still light and airy enough for me that I can see, you know, some lighter areas that may be snow. So again, we're kind of practicing and doing things in our own way. This is one of the best ways to learn how to use watercolor and apply the colors and hold space, right? And where we practice on working our way from the foreground to the background, using lighter colors and darker colors. My trees have lots of personality. I may even make those side trees a little darker. Those big trees with those red buds, I might even make those a little darker while I'm in here. Let's see here. And we all have different greens. These trees could be a little darker. So there's an evolution to our art, as always. It's okay for things to change as you paint. Always things can change. These tree limbs wanted to be darker, so I'm going to make them a little darker, right? That contrast for me was really important based on my vision, right? Sometimes we have a vision of some things we paint, sometimes we don't. It's fine either way, but for me, the contrasting elements of the goose or the duck being lighter and the sky having contrast, the trees, some of these tree limbs having a little more contrast, those are important things for me. And you likely have similar ideas in your mind of what you want to see. So it's really fun and helpful to be aware of those elements as you're painting. Don't block those out. Let them just happen. There we go. All right. So my goose has evolved. I would say what some of the final touches for this painting, again, we're working light to dark. So if you want to add any other darker contrasting areas to your goose, this is a great time to do that, or you're painting anywhere in particular. So for me, as an example, I was just doing the branches a darker color. I could make the orange darker on the duck's feet and the orange darker on the duck's beak to really make the bottom of the beak stand out. So I'm just going to show you what that looks like just to give you an example. So on the right side of my duck's legs, I'm going to make these a little darker. Oops. So look at that shading down there. Now, if it's too much, you can just wipe it with your finger. You can blend it in, blend it over using your water. right? Lots of options, lots of ideas here. Swipe it with your finger. If it's too much pigment, wipe some of it off, okay? I'm gonna do the same thing on the underside of the beak, just to show you the contrast. Maybe I bring it up along the nose just a little bit. Use a little water to blend it in. So you can be playful with where you bring in some of these darker elements. Totally up to you. Okay. Is there enough shading on the underside of your duck's beak, right? There's all these different things you can play with. Maybe on the underside of the chin, like, are you happy with the color of the feathers, right? All these different things that you can consider. Is there enough shading on the underside of the duck's body, right? As an example, if I bring in a little bit more darker textures down here, I could add a little bit more shading. Totally up to you if that's something you want to do or not. But most importantly, I hope everybody had a nice time. I'm going to come in maybe with a little bit of white. You can do a little bit of edging or a little bit of outlining. Round the end. So I have a little bit of the white from the snow. If you could round the whole inside of the duck's neck down to the front of the body, just as a little bit of a clean line. It may not do a lot, but it may just give you a little structure. Totally optional. There's quite a bit of tan and shading on the bottom of the duck's body. I didn't do a lot of those browns. If I wanted to add more, I could. I'm going to keep it fairly light. I could add a little bit more, smudge it with my finger a little bit, but I'm not going to go too crazy. I'm going to keep it nice and light. All right. But I hope everyone is enjoying the class. If anyone, again, on the recording has any questions or you need any help with any tips, do not hesitate to ask. But for anyone who's watching the tutorial, I want to thank you again for being here. And we'll talk again soon.